My name's Todd M. Casey, and welcome to Shop Talk. This is an interview series where I sit down with artists in their studios where we tell stories, talk about our experiences, but also offer our expertise. These interviews are unscripted and how discussions often are in artist studios. Please join me as I talk with artists and, of course, talk shop. It's funny, I find that like the methodology in which I paint is the way I do everything. And I remember when I was at Polo, I would give people like a Frankenstein like first draft of something, and they're like, what's it going to look like? And I'm like, I'll take it there if it's good, and I'm not going to go all the way to the end if it sucks. It's going to waste my time, and I could be focusing on a bunch of ideas, and then you pick the best one.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, that's actually literally the conversation I just had with one of our students, is that for a color study, there's no purpose in putting all the flashy details in for a color study, because you're trying to see what it looks like as a whole to see what's worth putting the effort into, and you need to see the overarching structure of the values and colors, and you're going to know if it's not a good painting just from the color study.
I say that all the time. I'm like, I'd rather do, I call them like poster studies.
Yeah.
But it really is a color study. It's really like a simplified version of the idea. But before you invest all that time in it, it's like you can kill an idea at this stage. So I have like a a cemetery in my studio of all these bad ideas that never made it to paintings. But I'm so happy that I did the poster study.
Yeah.
To then not have to spend so much time, you know.
Yeah.
How I know you teach like the boot camp, right?
Yeah.
Which is kind of like a version of that.
It is that. It's totally that. So Color Bootcamp uses color studies more as a learning tool and an exercise, not only in paint application, but also understanding that painting is more about relationships than it is matching. So I think if somebody is looking to get better at painting, or even just learn painting from the ground up, the Color Bootcamp information and color study information, it's all there.
Yeah.
So it's physically how to work with the paint. It's how much paint to load on the brush. It's how to deal with limitations, how to deal with compression, how to improvise and make changes on the canvas, how to interpret a visual stimulus, and how to then translate it or interpret it in our language of paint. So I honestly believe that if somebody sat down and thoughtfully and purposely did like 100 color studies, you've got all the skills there for painting.
Yeah. And
then when you go to like a larger, more elaborate painting, where even if you're doing glazing and scumbling or working transparently or working opaquely, you have all the skills necessary.
Yeah.
So the Color Bootcamp is really meant to be more of like a foundational grounding in the act of oil painting. And color's kind of like the distractor. Like people think it's going to be this like fun, colorful thing, but it really, I think they're accidentally learning how to paint.
Yeah.
And so I would agree that the cemetery of ideas, for me, they don't even get to color study. For me, they actually don't get past the setup. Like the setup has to be what it is. The color study is more about how am I going to manipulate the invented things. How am I going to manipulate what I see to make it the painting I want it to be? I don't know what that looks like until I start actually playing in the paint, because the paint's really where it comes alive.
Yeah. The
paint's where you actually get to say your full language and see what's possible, and that's where I'm going to make the modifications. That's where I'm going to say, oh, this is, I don't think I've ever actually set up a painting and did a color study and decided that I'm not going to do it. And that's because I can manipulate and change on the canvas so that it does work.
So you're already at a good idea by the time you get there. That's awesome.
So there's a lot of my idea's cemetery is mostly it never sees the light of day, but there are a ton of them. And I have, like, for example, that setup has probably been up there for at least 6 months, because it's maybe 75% there. Like there's, I don't know, I don't see a framework for it yet. Like I like the objects, I like the colors, but there isn't a whole picture there.
Yeah.
And then this idea has actually been on the shelf for probably 2 years, but it only took me actually starting to put the stuff together before I felt like, okay, let's Photoshop or do the drawing and then feel out a color study. So the ideas, there is a graveyard of ideas.
Yeah. No, for sure. It looks like...
But they don't get to paint ever. Really.
So you're basically sitting and living with it, and then you're looking at it every day and then adding or subtracting, or that Eureka Moment comes when you're at a workshop somewhere else, or you see the prop and go, that's what it was missing, right?
Yes. And it's really, and you can't plan for that. And it's not a recipe. And that's where I think it really ties into the way that artists go out the world, is you have to constantly, for better or worse, constantly be open to like the universe putting something in front of you.
Yeah.
And I always joke that I'm not like a woo-woo type of person, but in a way I am, because I'm letting serendipity, or I'm letting randomness be the thing that puts something in front of me that I can then connect previously unconnected data points.
Yeah.
And then that's exciting for me, and that's where I get like the goosebump moments.
So it's funny because it's like we're actively always shopping, I would imagine, because we're both still life painters, right?
Yeah.
But we're also not, right? Like the whole Robert Henri quote that I put in like the Artist to Life was, I'm interested in art as a way of living, not as a way of making a living.
Yes.
To me, I'm like, there's no separation when I go to do a workshop where I stop at whatever it is to get a coffee, and I'm like, oh, they got a cool prop up there next to it, right? An old coffee maker or something. And I'm like, oh, that is the instant connection to the thing at home, because I do it the same way. Some of the stories I tell are like, it took me, the boat painting in the Artist Still Life, 4 years to work out, but I worked it out through a couple color studies, so that's part of the process. And then from there, I found little props that were like, oh, that's what it was missing. And then all of a sudden, you know, you're ready, and then you take it and run.
Yeah, that's exciting. That's always when the gas pedal can be fully depressed.
Well, you found the needle in the haystack that you feel like was what it was missing.
Yeah. And there's times that when I was I have my online recorded webinar, The Magic of Indirect Painting. And I think sometimes when we're doing workshops, I find the most stressful thing is actually like, I need to do a setup fast.
Yeah.
Right? So I went out to do this workshop in Utah, and I was bringing a couple things, but I was a little like, because that's where really my time and effort mostly goes to. So I was like, I got to set something up within 24 hours.
Yeah.
And I had to work with a lot of their props, and it is always relieving that like when you're kind of under pressure, you can make it work. And so I think there's multiple ways to take the same setup and make it work in different ways, or take similar objects. And I've had this dream in theory, and you're always involved in it, where I take the same objects and I put them in a box and I ship them to different still life painters, and then we don't get to show each other what we're doing, and we see what we all end up with the same objects.
Yeah, well, even like lighting or studio.
Exactly, the lighting, the background information, how it's composed, how it's designed, the overarching like proportions of the canvas. Like that would just be really interesting to see. Like, so I set up one for the Magic of Indirect Painting. I did spend time with it, but I did. There was a point at which I landed on a setup. I'm like, this is valid. This could work.
Yeah.
But there's just something where I was like, I have the time. I'm going to sit with it, and I'll play a little bit more. And the concept of play, I think, is incredibly important, because that's really where you give yourself the freedom to try and test and enjoy that part of the process. It's stressful. I mean, I don't know about you, but that setup always stresses me out because I just want it to be good. But that's really where our improv and play that's really for me where it happens. Like there's a little bit of technical play when I'm doing textures or working with the paint in a specific way. But to me, the real creative challenge is making something worthwhile of my time and effort when it comes to putting the paint on the canvas.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you feel like Do you ever like switch something after you've started it and you're like, I have a better idea, or are you like locked in at that point?
97% of the time.
Wow, very, very technical.
97% of the time, I don't change a thing other than like modifications within the color study where I change values, colors, relationships.
Yeah.
I have a certain painting right now where I'm specifically exploring diving into tangents, and I'm purposely shifting drawing information so that there are more tangents. So that's more of like a manipulation of the drawing, and I'm doing that on purpose. So that gets changed while I'm drawing or while I'm setting it up or while I'm trying to, before it goes to paint. I already have that kind of intended. There has been 2 or 3 instances, that's the 3%.
Wow.
In which I kind of make a late in the game adjustment. One of them was I decided not to go with a circular frame and do a rectangular frame, so I needed to reconsider some corners. And that might be an addition of like there was a sticker in the lower corner to help color kind of balance out. But for the most part, that's all pretty much kind of the major structures thought out in the color study. And if there's any major changes, and by major changes, I mean like a small adjustment.
Yeah.
My version of a major change is probably somebody else's like minute change. But to me, like changes late in the game don't really happen because I've kind of done all the upfront structure in the color study and or drawing and or
all the exploration was in
Yeah.
everything that got you to now I'm going to make it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even those great paintings, I feel sometimes I'm like, even those paintings that have gone through this graveyard and death and resurrection, it'll turn into something else or a couple versions of it. I'm like, it's still hard to sell it. So when it goes to the gallery, I'm like, it's kind of what keeps me sharp because I'm like, I have to do an awesome painting every time.
Yeah.
But that doesn't always mean it's going to sell.
Yeah. Well, and I mean that's something that we, I think, as individuals need to balance what's important to us.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a right or wrong. I think we each are just responsible to ourselves to have motivators that make sense to us, and for some people it might be that it's important to sell because they just need to make a living with the sales, and so the priorities then shift a bit. I'm very fortunate that I never thought I'd say this, but I'm fortunate that I have a job. I have a job that is steeped in art, and I have a life that I've kind of crafted so that it still makes me better at what I do because I'm teaching what I do. Yeah. I'm very passionate about it. I believe in it, and it allows for me the time because it really does require time. It's an investment. Yeah. It's a time investment and it's an effort investment, and it's hard. Yeah. So it's, to me, it's, each person has to feel out what is important, and you can make a great painting and it's a great painting and it doesn't sell, and that's okay in a way. Yeah. For me, I'm like, it's just going to live, all my portraits. Yeah. All my portraits live here because they are like, they're made because I wanted to make them. I needed to make them. Yeah. But I don't expect them to sell. If they do, great. Yeah. But it's not really up to me.
Travis Scott had a good one. He said, "Do paintings you'd hang on the walls of your home because they're probably going to end up there anyway." Yeah. I think it's interesting because it's like there's always like, not always, but some galleries want that, like they want to tell you, like I know I'm asked like, oh, this is what sells or this is what we like of your work, and I'm just like, that's not exactly what I want to do. Right. So I'm kind of always moving. Sometimes I'll move back into that space and be like, there's overlap. But again, I'm in a position too where I do a lot of teaching, and I'm like, it affords me to say no to that. So do you get any of that, like your galleries?
Yeah, I mean, I think because they have a job. Yeah. And their job requires, inventory that kind of fits the relationships they have with their sellers. So their motive is to get more of what their relationship with their buyers require. Right. And that makes total sense. And they can ask me as much as they want for a very specific piece, but there's nothing that's going to change what I do here because I also know when I'm not invested. Yeah. If I'm making something that I'm not invested in, I feel it, and it feels like a job.
Yeah.
Not to say that when it doesn't feel like a job, it's not hard work,
Yeah.
but it feels like a job.
Yeah.
Right? And that's where I think I know myself, and I just know it's very easy for me to check out if I feel like, if I'm starting to do something because I think there's going to be a reaction or a sale because of it, it's not the same experience.
Yeah.
And I much more prefer, and I feel like I make better work when that part is not involved.
Yeah.
And you just have to stay true, or I just have to stay true to what I want to be doing, because the ironic thing is when I do what I want to do,
Yeah.
that's what sells.
Yeah, and you love it. Like,
Yeah.
you're happy doing it. Yeah. I think
Yeah.
Howard Pyle said, throw your heart into the painting or the picture, and then jump in after it. I
Yeah.
think it's a good place to be. So when it comes to like I love that there's like this awesome narrative quality to your work. Where is it coming from? Like, do you read a lot, or?
It could be. So I always grew up reading was like a love from a very young age. But I also think some of my earliest art influences was Norman Rockwell.
Yeah.
And so I think storytelling, we can all relate to it. I also think in terms of a culture, I feel like I don't have a really, I guess, rich culture that I come from. Suburbs and like.
Are you from Massachusetts?
I'm from upstate New York.
Okay.
And so like my family's great. It was a wonderful place to grow up, but I just don't feel like I had like tangible culture to attach to in a way. And so I feel like stories, the stories I read growing up and books were my culture in a way. And so in a way there are these kind of like places where you like learn characters and stories and songs and things like that I feel like each painting is kind of a story, is like a book in a way. And I often use books within my paintings because I feel like they are really powerful as elements and structure in a painting, but they also are indicative of kind of what I strive for in a piece. Is I want it to be personal. I want it to be intimate. When you're reading, it's just you in this environment, right? It's a very intimate, like very self-contained and very, and it takes you to a place where you get to make meaning out of things. Yeah. The individual, the viewer. So when I make pieces, I am telling a story, but I don't want it to be a boring story. I don't want it to be an obvious story. And I want each person to have their own narrative or story that maybe is like parallel to kind of what I was going for, but like once it leaves here, it's not mine anymore.
Yeah.
Once I'm done, once it's cathartic, it's done, it's out there, I got it scanned, I took a good picture, and then I needed to go live out in the world with somebody else or with other people, because then it becomes like 1,000 million other paintings by each person looking at it.
Yeah, well, I mean, we can't control the story that they bring to it or the meaning that people bring to objects or things. It's interesting because, like, when you bring up Norma Rockwell, that's where I started with it too. And we didn't have one. My mom and dad, who are like, we couldn't draw a straight line, kind of parents.
Yeah.
I just had them on the wall, and I would just be like, oh, there's a whole story in this one image, and you just kind of get lost in them.
Do you remember which one was because I had Coming Home. I remember my grandfather had that print. That was the one that I remember. Did you have one or two specific?
Whole story behind that, where I forget what his name was, did a copy of it, and they hid it in the wall of his home. And then when he got divorced, he had the painting Coming Home, and then when he got divorced, he made a copy of it because he didn't want to give it to his wife, I think. So they found it in the wall of the house years later, and the one that the Rockwell Museum had was fake.
Oh, that's funny. I did not know that.
But he did such a good job of copying it. He was a friend of Rockwell.
Yeah.
We had the one with the dad. I think it was Sunday morning, where he's with the newspaper, and he's trying to duck, and the family's going behind him. There's a lot of like funny moments in like Rockwell that I loved about it too. And then
humor being, especially when you're telling a story, I try to put humor as something that I feel like isn't always maybe celebrated in people's artwork, or like the ability to kind of like toy or play that playful. Playful and humor and fun. I just had a conversation with a guy on an airplane, and we started getting into like, does the world have to be tormented in order to create good artists? And I was like, I don't know if agree with that. I think there's plenty to be celebrated, and I think the drive to make and create can come out of happiness and celebration or humor as well. And I hope
Absolutely.
that for the most part, a lot of my work does have a lightness, like a humor, a fun quality to it.
I think so. I think that's one of the reasons why I love it. What was interesting was that I came from an illustration background, which is the Norma Rockwell path, mass art here in Boston. And then I went into animation, which was just a love for like The Incredibles. There's always a humorous element to Disney movies or Pixar. And then I started to do, it led me to this art, and then it was very cerebral. You're like in it,
Yes.
and it's like everything is very like,
technical, very like
Yeah.
There's like a coldness to the information in many ways.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes hard, I think, for people to figure out how to move that into a more personal space.
Right. Well, and my wife was like, it's very cerebral. Like you're in your philosophy side and all that, and getting into your stories, but there's this wackiness of you. Like you have a beer, and I'm telling jokes and making people laugh, and she's like, not that there has to be an element in it, but she kind of just pointed it out that like there's kind of two divides in the work that you're doing. And I was like, that's interesting. Why can't they come together?
Yeah.
And then I started to like see if I could do that, and I think it's the same playfulness I see in your work, where I'm like, I know she loves the work that she's doing. It's it's awesome. It's colorful. It's playful. A lot of work I see coming out of schools is not colorful. You can tell that you have like a love and a passion for it.
I do.
You want to talk about that?
I mean, color is just, it's one of those things where I think it's also those of us who are painters. So I usually joke with my students and anybody here at the school or anybody who comes for a tour at the school, they come in and they want to be painters. Like the goal is painting, right? And I'm like, you have to do the drawing program first. And I said, listen, I hate drawing. I hate doing charcoal drawings, and I hate doing cast drawings. Like I hate drawing. But drawing gets me to be a better painter.
Right.
And so you have to train drawing to be a painter. If you need those skills to do the painting, because if you can't draw it, then you can't paint it.
Yeah.
Right? So my drive is I want to be a painter because of the color. Like it's really that's something I've just always responded to. It's just something that I just feel like I mostly wear all black, but in my life,
purple hair.
I know, but like a purple hair, yeah. So like I feel like color is one of those things that is emotional.
Yeah.
It creates visual interest and drama and fun.
It's impactful too.
It's impactful. So I color tends to be like a driver of a lot of my work. So usually they won't start out with actual narratives. They will start out completely abstractly, focusing mainly on color, value, or shape.
Yeah.
And I will build kind of piles of stuff, or I will collect ideas relating to a specific color, shape, or abstract quality. And out of that, I can find narratives. And then I will start to go down, then I'll follow that path, right?
Yeah.
So I'll use the abstract qualities to like swim around in until something makes sense. And if it excites me enough, then I'm willing to go down that path. But it's mostly colors, the driver of a lot of what I start with.
Yeah.
And it allows for me to like just respond gutturally or naturally to something without it actually having a specific meaning behind it yet.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then it translates over into, do you build your palette out of it, or do you always have the same palette?
I always have, I call it my starting lineup. I have 9 paints, and I do have a blog post and a YouTube channel about it. So my starting lineup is the same 9 paints plus white every single time. My friends are always there for me. Like these I know, like the back of my hand, I could paint blinded probably with this palette. And that's just the one I learned with, except with an addition of like a cobalt turquoise. Like that's the only addition from the standard palette that we learned here at the school. But what I love about that is a very powerful palette. It's not a big palette, but the choices on the palette are a wide gamut. They're, most of the stuff you're going to be painting can be hit with these colors. And then I always have like what I call my special guests.
Mm.
So specific paintings may have special guests depending on like if I can't, like purples. I'm usually, because I've
Purple's always that color,
the
right?
purples are all the ones that I always have to like maybe get a special guest for.
Yeah.
Or for the most part, yellows are pretty, with my palette's pretty good. Greens.
Yeah.
Maybe like where I need to combine a different blue and yellow to get a specific green. But
Yeah.
for my starting lineup, it's the same every time. I put them out. Even if I'm not expecting to work on a yellow object, I put all my 3 yellows out.
I feel those are the 2 colors that everyone always struggles with. Like even
Yellows and
landscape
purples.
painters, right? They're
Yes.
like, some of them have an array of greens, some of them have like ultramarine blue and cadmium lemon or something.
Yeah.
But then purple violet is a color that like there wasn't a lot of options over the years.
Yeah.
And I feel the same way. I'm always like, if I am going to get a purple, I'll usually go with a manganese violet because I love what it does to like skin tones. Or I'm going to throw in...
manganese violet? I don't know if I have that one.
Yeah.
I've had ultramarine violet.
Yeah, that's a good one too.
So it's weak.
Very
Is
weak.
manganese?
Yeah.
Yeah.
PV15, I think.
You know who I learned that from was Michael Klein. I saw him do a demo one day, and I was working on some gold yellow fabric, and it was like horrible.
Yeah.
And I was like, why does this keep looking dirty?
Yeah.
And I saw a Michael Klein demo at, I believe it was some conference. So I saw him do a demo, and he was doing skin tones, oranges and yellow. And he was using, I'm assuming manganese violet's also very weak tinting, but ultramarine,
Very low. Yeah.
ultramarine violet or cobalt violet, super weak.
Oh, yeah.
Super weak, but a nice enough of a purple that it kind of can drop chroma in yellows and oranges without it looking gross.
Yeah.
So that was a huge like aha moment for me, is like if I'm working in yellows and oranges, that weak tinting purple can really be
if you
great.
want to shift it a little bit. I think the beauty of like some of these old master colors, like cobalt violet came around, I think around the early 20th century, maybe a little earlier, but they didn't have a lot of purple violets, and manganese was the replacement of cobalt, was that they were so weak when you added them to something.
I used to think, I remember getting that paint because I was trying to hit a certain color, and somebody suggested try glazing cobalt violet over white to get the chroma. I was like, okay, I'll try that. And I was like, this thing is so weak. Why would anybody buy a tube of this? Like, you basically are buying a very expensive tube of nothing. But, as a more advanced painter, like, you realize the benefit of the weaker tinting.
Yeah, so cobalt violet, I think what's crazy about is the price tag, right? It's like, it's a series like 7 or 8. It's always the highest one, and it's like $80 a tube, and I think that's why, just like ultramarine blue came around, the one that we know, the French ultramarine blue, which is a synthetic version, not lapis lazuli, which is the original. I think manganese violet came around because cobalt was so expensive, but it's way cheaper. It's like a series 1.
Yeah.
But what it does to skin tones when you add it is it gently pulls it over, almost like you paint with flake white.
Yeah.
Right. So flake white or lead white or creminence, whatever we want to call it, right?
So
it's
much better.
very, very gentle, right?
Yeah.
Not like titanium, which is like pull you over.
Oh yeah.
Similarly, like vermilion. So like all of these things are skin tones, or great to add into skin tones because they gently pull it over.
Yeah, it's not a dioxazine purple.
Yeah. Well, the other one is quinacridone violet or quinacridone magenta, and I'm like, those ones are just gonna pull it quickly.
I mean, they're nice. They're great. They're great for super high chroma stuff. But man, like trying to make mixtures, you've got to really, and that's where I think my biggest suggestion for people, especially learning how to paint or trying to get more control over their painting, is that you have to know what your paints are going to do.
Yeah.
Like you have, and that I usually do. I have these like grids where I have done tests where basically it's the tubed paint mixed with white, transparent. Just those 3 things. So those 3 things, if you know what it looks like out of the tube, if you know what it looks like mixed with white and how strong of a tinting strength it is, you'll see it as you play with it. And then transparent over white to see what its true glazing chroma capabilities are. Those 3 things is information. And then the more you use a paint, and this is why I always have only just those 9 paints out, is the more you use it, the more it becomes subconscious, the more you don't think about it. Yeah. Because so much happens up on the canvas. This is like chaos. You have to gotta think on your feet, improvise. if you're thinking, how much of this should I add to make this lighter? Like,
I don't know what this does.
I don't know what this does, right? And anytime I add a special guest, I have to slow down my mixing process, because when I reach for it, I have to be thoughtful, right? And so that to me is like, right now with just those 9 paints, I don't have to think about this. I can deal with my panic up here because something's not working, and I know kind of what to do. But on my palette, it's like I like to not have to think about it and bring that process up to the consciousness level.
I think of it almost like different cars, where I'm like, when I borrow my wife's car, she has everything in the spots where she wants it, and she has a different car, and I'm like, where's the power window here? Oh, it's a crank, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like everything is all about like, there's
automaticity.
Yeah, it's like everyone has these things. They're just in different spots. Some of them will go fast, some of them will go slow. But it's why like the debates over color and stuff, I'm like, shouldn't we be celebrating diversity? Like, I love that you get a lot of color in yours, and I'm not going to be able to hit it because I don't have the same set, or I'm going to get a slight variation of it.
I actually like that analogy. I'm going to steal that. The car, the presets, the seat.
I was just driving, so.
No, I like that's a really good analogy in terms of like either just a palette. Like you go to a workshop and you've got one palette, and you come to my workshop, you have a different palette, right? So if the mindset and you're familiar with my paint, you're going to sit down at my palette and be able to use that palette to some degree. And it's the same with painting process, right? So it just feels more natural for some people to just work a little bit looser and then build up to refinement. Other people like to really get everything nailed in and then, do more special effects. It's, you specialize, add on, different transmissions or, whatever to make what works for you.
Yeah.
And that's where there is no right or wrong. And I do fully encourage anybody, even advanced painters like myself, to go and learn from other people and learn like what they're doing, because you may find that something fits the bill for you. Yeah.
Well, I think it's like we kind of go on autopilot, and then we know what the car does, right? The analogy. And then you get in another car and you're like, oh, this is interesting. Like this goes faster in the takeoff, right? Or now I have a stick shift and now I can play around more with like the transmission. I think it ends up throwing a bit more kind of creativity in it when you see somebody's process. And also the idea of like the guest color or the guest lineup.
Yeah.
Is that what you call it?
Special guest.
Is just kind of like you're throwing a little bit of like, not quite sure what this is going to do. I kind of have an idea what it's going to do, but depending on which pigment it is, Doxine, even if it's almost the same color as ultramarine violet, but it's going to be way different.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's going to act differently. I say it's personalities.
Yeah.
I call them personalities because I do feel like sometimes I quantify them as like, this guy's like a bully.
Yeah.
This lady is a wallflower.
That's funny.
This lady is the life of the party, I mean, it also makes it, I think, easier for people to like learn and remember. But and it's just, I think technical information is great. Like if you tell me exactly what Munsell notation that paint is, that means nothing to me in a way.
Right.
So it really is more important to me that I understand like where it lives in space, and also more importantly, what it's going to do, like what it's going to look like and what it's going to do and how it's going to act. Like that actually is more impactful. Right.
There's the kind of prediction model that you have of what you think it will do. And then there's the actual when you get it in there and you're like, oh, this is quite different, or it shifts in color space.
Or it's so transparent, I can't do anything with it.
Yeah, there's a couple colors. I think ultramarine violet is actually one of them where I'm like, it just doesn't do much.
You can't paint with it. You can adjust with it.
Yeah.
Right? Or
there's an ultramarine green too.
Oh, I haven't tried
that. I have it too. I
Is
was amazed.
it really ultramarine green, or is it just blue and yellow mixed together?
No, I'm a big proponent of that too, which is just like another marketing name for a paint manufacturer. This was, I think it was.
Sorry if I'm like kicking your microphone here.
You're good. I think it was Wallace Seymour has a line of paints. I think he worked with Michael Harding in some of the mediums, and I ordered because he had original vermilion, and sometimes I dork out. I'm like, is there a really high chroma vermilion, because you don't really ever see it. Michael Harding has a less chromatic vermilion, and then there's the whole Zorn palette idea, and I've gotten into online arguments with people over like where's the high chroma vermilion? Yeah. Nobody knows where it is, but they're making arguments and claims, and I'm like, so I was like, oh, I'm gonna get his vermilion. It's from 1970 out of like a mine. He actually had some natural cinnabar, and he threw in a couple tubes, and one of them was like ultramarine green, and I just was like, what? And it's real. Yeah. So I looked up the CIN.
So it's just like is it a weak green?
Very weak. It's the same thing as ultramarine violet. I was like, this doesn't do anything.
Yeah. Well, you can use it for glazing.
Yeah.
Or I just feel like it is more of an adjusting color.
Yeah.
It's really actually powerful because yellows are one of purples I think are the hardest to mix and get in those higher chroma worlds, but I think yellows in general tend to be much more challenging because you're trying to turn form, you're trying to adjust value, but then the hue goes like wildly too far off to one way or the other. And it's just brown. It's more of a fickle.
Yeah.
So like especially like I'm doing that one that's like very very yellow, and so it's really, and you're trying to do it because yellow is such a lighter value in general, especially with those higher chromas. You just you're trying to deal with turning form, and making it bright and then making it dark, and so I like those weaker colors for the adjusting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so fascinating too because when you were saying like out of the tube, it's called mass tone. Transparent. It's called
what?
Mass tone.
Mass tone?
Yeah.
Okay. And then I learned something new today.
The thin application is called undertone. So there's a mass tone and undertone of every color, which is why when I look at
so that's just like where you're glazing it over white.
Yeah, even if you just took it and smeared it over if you rubbed it into the canvas, right? Just like transparent red oxide, you'd be like, wow, it's orange. Just
spreading it over white.
Yeah. And then if you put it on
undertone and mass tone.
Yeah, like a big fat thick blob of it.
Yeah, opaque.
Yeah, but it's like when I look at those two colors, the same color, transparent red oxide, right? Or red earth.
Yeah.
Totally different, not totally different, same family, but you would get totally different Munsell notations on if it were
a black surface.
Exactly.
A purple white surface, or a white gray surface. Yeah.
And I'm just sitting there going like, I get the appeal of Munsell to a degree, but then I'm at the same time going like, but that doesn't particularly help me
as a painter.
It's an isolated piece of data.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think there's an appeal. There's an appeal to the quantification.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we don't have the luxury of objective truth in painting. Mm-hmm. So yes, I could match something, a specific color. Does that actually help me in painting? Not really.
Right. Well, as you said at the beginning, I think it was all about the relationships, right?
Right. So just because I match it doesn't mean that that's what it needs to end up in my painting. Maybe it needs to end up darker because I need the thing next to it to look lighter.
Yeah.
So and that's where I think there's not enough push with relationships.
Right.
To really to be like, you have to just look and react.
Yeah.
And that's where I think it's also really a shame for when people look at just atelier training in general, or looking at like how people do bark drawings, the assumption is that it's just a copying tool, and it's just about why don't you just take a picture type of thing. Right. And that just means that there's a lack of understanding that really what we're doing is trying to train sensitivity to visual experiences, and understanding how we can translate information and make decisions, like as a director, right? So like we do make changes to reality. And how often, like you're saying, like, do you make changes late in the game? No, but I've already known those changes I will make because of the color study, and that's why I think it's just so beneficial. But really pushing that, it's about being sensitive to relationships, not only in color but value in relationships in space. That's what drawing is, right? Yeah. Relationships in space, relationships to the context of the canvas. It's everything is relationships, and nothing lives by itself objectively in a vacuum. Mm-hmm. We don't as humans, and our colors don't on the canvas. Yeah,
so fascinating. Yeah, I can't help but think even about like, is it just a step closer to like AI even? Because it's like once you open up the Pandora's box of like matching and it's a copy, then it's like, well, why wouldn't I just trace a photo or, get a device that would tell me exactly what it is And I'm sure we're not too far away from it, which is
Right.
just hold up my phone, it's going to give me a Munsell notation, and then I could probably find an AI bot to mix it for me.
Yeah.
And do I have to be the one to apply it to say
Right.
that I did it?
Right.
You know, and I kind of like go down that road of like, what element are we bringing to it? I think there's a human imperfection that we bring
Yes.
that, just like you were saying about the still life setups, if we all had different ones, I would hope that we all don't do the same setup, right?
Well, I don't know. We'll know.
Can't imagine.
We'll know when we do it.
I know, it sounds like we're hashing out a plan here.
I mean, in that same regard, like, the camera is gonna be the death of painting. No,
Right.
it wasn't. It's like, so it becomes this thing of like the creating, the making, the doing, the tangible paint, the picking up the brush, and there's a mechanical tangibility action, and it's not
Tactile.
it's not the end. Is the goal to have a painting that looks good at the end? Like, in a way, sort of, but like if you have AI do that and mix it and tell you what to do, then listen, if that's gratifying to you,
Right.
then by all means, I think you should do it, because we only have short time on this earth, and
Right.
if you really get pleasure and you enjoy the process of reading a number and then having something mix it for you and then you putting it in a specific spot on the canvas, more power to you.
Right.
I just know personally, and from the people that I've worked with or just come into contact with, that does not sound like the experience they're trying to get out of this thing you're spending a lot of time with.
Yeah. I do think it is a matter of perception too, which is just like people come in and they see it, and then they see that we get close, and then I even hear my work is photorealistic, and I'm like, maybe if you're like looking at it on like Instagram and
you're looking at it on a small
on your little
screen.
phone.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'm like, no, go see the painting. I mean, the painting is a painting. It's a different thing. There's an interaction of light with the paint film. If you're glazing, it's like there's a refractive index that's playing and it's reflecting, it's absorbing light, and it's brightening things up. And like I think part of it is a function of that. Like a lot of art these days.
The perception and the assumptions of like when you're kind of like so
Digital
far
devices.
outside. Yeah, when you're so outside of maybe the world of kind of either traditional painting or just what we're doing. I mean, I think even digital artists struggle with this as well, is because like the experience of making has to be gratifying. The experience of the process has to be gratifying. And, you deal with like you see something so compressed, and without enough experience either understanding the process or understanding the intention. And that's why I always encourage people to come through for tours.
Yeah.
Because they're going to come in and see all the work on the walls. And I always say this is student work that's all on the walls. And I know it feels like we're kind of doing these very mechanical copies. But I want to bring you upstairs to show you where we start from, how we're working from life, and how we're actually modifying what we're seeing. And we have a relationship with our materials.
Mm-hmm.
We have a personal relationship with the material, with the paint, with the color, and we're making decisions, and we're reacting to something, right, to not only what's happening in front of us in the setup, but also to what the paint's doing. Like you're saying, hey, that paint going transparently over the darker background actually causes kind of a grayish haze, and I like that, right?
Yeah.
So that experience allows for you to then to repeat that because you understand what's going on.
Yeah.
But that you're playing with, like, you can make the same painting opaquely that you did with glazes, and they would be totally different experiences. Yeah. And that's, we're probably deep diving into what we do, but, I can understand how, like you're saying, the perceived notion on the outside or from somebody just starting or seeing it on social media has the assumption, well, you're just copying and it's passive and it's, matching.
Yeah.
Or it's like literally anything but. And it's impossible to match.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also, I think what you were kind of getting to is a love for the journey to get to the end, right? It's not just at the end I have this beautiful painting. It's I love the process of getting there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, the process of getting there. And I think that I do have a love of the technical. Like, I love technique. And honestly, some of the only times I've really been moved in a museum is not because the piece was that conceptually moving,
Mm-hmm.
I actually feel like I've been physically, like emotionally moved more by like somewhat like abstractish work more.
Mm.
But there's when I see like a really well done painting,
Mm-hmm.
that is actually more emotionally moving to me. Like I saw Caravaggio in Ireland, and it was, probably some religious thing, and like I'm not religious, and the content means nothing to me. But when I look at this painting and you're getting close to it and you see this like brush stroke, it's like that connection of the same person who had the same, we're dealing with the same challenges that I am. It's like that thread through humanity, and the connection with somebody who ended up as in this iconic role in history, but I'm trying to do this too.
Yeah.
And it's done unbelievably well on this canvas, and that to me is really moving.
Yeah.
And to me, the concept, like the content, I'm moved by my own content, obviously, and there's some pieces, but they aren't always the best technically done.
Yeah.
But they're more moving. Like if you look at, like, Rockwell is just amazing, but if you look at his technique, there's like a lot of just like he's doing it quickly, right? Not everything is like meticulously done, and that's part of the enjoyment of the pieces themselves. Is you see him in person, you're like, this is just undertone. This is just literally toning the canvas. This is just him plopping some white down, and you're like, mind blowing, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, the technical I love, and I do love the executing where it's a challenge, and then I'm able to do it, and that's really fun and exciting.
Yeah.
But in the end, it's in service to this larger kind of narrative conceptual piece that I'm putting my heart and soul into before it even gets started.
Mm. What blew me away about Rockwell because you've obviously been to the Rockwell Museum, right?
Yes.
But, and I think it probably is like, you're from upstate New York, so it's probably the same drive, a couple hours from where you were?
Yeah.
Was that just to see the scale of them? Because everything that I saw was scaled down into an 8x10 or 9x12.
Right, postcard.
Yeah,
magazine.
But the color, I was like, he's so playful. There's so much undertone. There's mass tone. There's all this thin paint and thick paint, but everything just seemed like he was having fun.
Yeah.
With the whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that comes across. I mean, that's where I think it was Vincent Desiderio who mentioned like a technical narrative, that was the first time I'd really heard about it. He came and did the figure painting competition here, which he judged. And he did this whole talk at one of our instructors' apartments when we were like having a party afterwards, and he brought up this concept of technical narrative in which like I think especially as somebody who can do up to trompe l'oeil and or like create really believable reality in 3 dimensions on a canvas, the idea of using the paint as a character was relatively new to me as well, because I do really enjoy the illusion, the trickery, the hiding of the paint. And actually Charles Sheeler, who's like a precisionist painter, he's somebody who I read the biography for, and he studied with William Merritt Chase, and then he studied with a couple other people, but he kind of pendulum swung between like very painterly to very precise, and he talked about like hiding the paint. Yeah. And I do that a lot with my like trompe l'oeil work, or the much more, realistic work. Surfaces even, and it's like you have to really get up close to kind of see like individual notes of like pure paint. Yeah. But depending on the piece, I might actually I'll push that more, because the technical narrative can also be a really cool layer to explore. So I did a whole self-portrait where I said, I'm only going to do the whole thing in a palette knife. Yeah. Because I want the paint to be present. I want the paint to have a voice and a obviousness and play a character in this narrative. Yeah. I mean, in general, I don't think it was a successful portrait, but it was an interesting like experiment. Yeah.
Oh, definitely. I think about this all the time. I was thinking of, again, I'm always like big on analogies. I think my analogy for that was like, I'm obsessed with a song right now, and it's just my nature.
It's like Pine Grove Shuffle.
That's not it.
Oh my god,
very close.
Because it's like stuck in my head.
But it's like we have a song, maybe you have it too, the same way, and I'm obsessed with it, but I don't know what the hell the song's about. I'm not even listening to the lyrics. So there's the mood and the way it just makes me feel. Yeah. And then there's the like, what the hell are the lyrics now is a secondary.
Yes.
So there's almost like, there's the picture, which is the thing that we're painting, and then there's the surface. And I think that they're both kind of, sounds like that's what
Yes. I completely agree. That's a really great parallel. I'm stealing that too.
All these, you got it on camera.
Stealing it. No, I completely agree. I mean, that's where it's like, it grabs you. Like the image
you don't
itself,
know why.
Image itself, like a Rockwell, the image and the narrative, like that's primary. And then you can get into like the secondary for us is like, look at what he's doing with the paint itself.
Yeah.
And it's a layer of information, it's a layer of storytelling that, you know, I don't know if everybody spends enough time with a painting to really see that. I think when you buy a painting and it lives with you, you do. You have the time for it to unfold in a way. Yeah. And that's where, like, when you have those earworms, like, it's the catch. It's the thing that really grabs you. But then you have the lyrics or whatever, or that, you know, I find it, my husband's a musician, and sometimes he's like, oh man, did you hear that drum line? And I always say to him, you know, I only hear a song as like a song. So he'll like, once he starts, it goes like this, dun, 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 dun. Then my brain can kind of compartmentalize it, and then I can hear some of the different things, and then I can appreciate it on a whole different level.
Right, and it's almost like that's kind of what we end up being as teachers, right? We're kind of showing you what it is, like a psychological priming. This is what you're looking for as a painter, right?
Yeah.
I mean, not that you want to tell anyone what they have to look for, but the eye of the painter, what it is to be in this little world and craft. That sounds like what you're like. You got to get the foundational elements. You need to play the instrument first, and then we can get into whatever music you want to make. Yeah. But most people start like over here. They want to jump in the deep end.
Like, I want to make a song.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, okay, let's learn guitar first.
Yeah, so what can you play? And you're like, nothing. All right.
I know that can be challenging, but like we can get you there. But it's just I think it's also a being reasonable with how much time that takes.
Yeah.
And the fastest way there is to slow down.
Yeah, and I think what was it? Michelangelo said, if they knew how hard I worked to get to mastery, they wouldn't be so impressed.
Yeah.
Right? It's like,
I think... I enjoy taking the magic out of it.
Of course, but I still think it's magical.
It's magical. I mean, I see it's magical in the minutia. Yeah. But I think when
we slow it down.
I'm a big fan of destroying the illusion.
The mystique.
Yeah, I want to show the man behind the curtain. Yeah. Because I do think that it makes it more approachable. And I do think that this is the stuff that we teach is logical, it's factual, it's experience, it's digestible. And that's what I know you and I both feel very strongly about, making information digestible for people and not overwhelming, because that can alienate people, and I'm not about alienating people because it's really easy to give up and to feel disheartened. And I was at a point in my life where I felt like I was almost there, where I was like, well, I guess I'm just not good enough. Yeah. And I don't ever want somebody else who loves this as much as we do to feel that way. Yeah.
I definitely think that compartmentalizing it down or focusing on things like a barn plate would be about blocking in and drawing the structure underneath, right? I think it was Andrew Loomis that said, by all means, learn it, drawing, perspective, structure, all of that now, so it doesn't hinder you for the rest of your life. Yeah. So it'll like take every little piece of it and break it down into a piece that you just mastered that, right? Now you're going to come over here and master that. Now you're going to come over and master color, right? Mm-hmm. And then you're going to put them together, and that's what painting is. And then you're going to realize that I need to go back over to this again.
What did you miss out of that? Or what, what could you reinforce over there? Absolutely. Right. And I mean, I also love to do deep dives into the psychology of learning, to a relatively shallow degree, but I think it's fascinating. And I do think it serves me better as an instructor to understand the sweet spot of too hard versus too easy, making sure you're breaking out. Is there a exercise, if you're having trouble, is there a breakout exercise? Mm-hmm. Would you be better off separating these skills and then dealing with it, because doing them at the same time is just too many balls in the air? Yeah. And it's really helpful. It's been helpful for me, just as I continue to learn, is being more reasonable about what I'm expecting of myself
Yeah.
when I'm learning something new and taking a new workshop. And it's scary, especially as like as a quote unquote more advanced painter, is like you have to go into any learning experience and just like put everything to the side and absorb and try to just and put the ego at the door, which is very challenging.
So are there things that like you're putting yourself into like other like workshops and stuff like that? Is that
So
what
for
you
me
recommend?
taking them?
Yeah.
Or what I recommend for what?
Well, you said that like you'd recommend people put their ego at the door. And
Whenever you learn anything new. I mean, I do that because I do still take workshops from other people. I took the diagnostic painter with Anthony Wychulis last year, and a bunch of other advanced painters went in there, and we just did, gradient exercises. And it's really illuminating how much you can fine tune your process and troubleshoot issues you're having back at the studio just by like having other experienced painters help you troubleshoot like the minutia, right?
Yeah.
The stuff that maybe is probably over a lot of other, way too like small minutia. But even like going to teach other workshops and you're exposed to other environments and other types of art. So I also like to look to other art forms for both inspiration but also process in terms of I have friends who are not realist painters. And so sometimes I like to ask them or look at their process and I look at the concepts they're exploring. Or they do a talk about their work, and it really does, again, new data, then we reassess, right? And that's kind of everything we do every day and that's why I think it's also important to not just be in your studio all the time, not experiencing life in the world. And that's because you need your responsibility, not you, but I feel like my responsibility as an artist and as a maker and as somebody who's also teaching is to experience as much as I can so that I'm making work that is like more holistic. And that it also like that I don't just kind of stay in a niche and I don't just keep making the same thing over and over again. Because I do think that's you could do that and if you still feel gratified by it, fine. I just feel like I'm easily bored. And I like to, I love poetry, I love music, and I like to take those things and be able to infuse that stuff that inspires me to make like bigger and better and more incredible and more meaningful work.
Same way. I think it was Emerson that said once the mind has been shaped into something different, it can't go back to where it was. I'm continuously doing it too. And when you said you were doing palette knife painting, I was like, I just finished actually my master's degree doing palette knife painting landscapes because I was like, I don't do them. But I could continually do like a set of still life paintings and I'm like, what am I going to learn?
So, and that was what I learned actually. So I was trying to do the self-portrait with a palette knife and then I was like, I didn't know what to do with it. So I was like, I'm just going to do something I don't care about with the palette knife painting. And I finished it and I was like, it was fun, but I was like, I don't think I really got much out of this more than I would a regular painting. If anything, I feel like I got less out of it because I'm not as thrilled with the end product. So I took that information and then went back to my painting and said, the big revelation that I made was that I'm just going to use the palette knife when I want to.
Well, that you don't want to do that, right? So if you had to create a Verge to go over there and do it now.
Or like, oh, this would make sense for me to like really slather on some paint and do a little bit more like planar exploration or simplified explanation, fine. But like, I think, sometimes it's always like, I like other people's work. I like a lot of range. So every so often I need to like explore what that looks like and feels like and see if it feels like it makes sense for me. And, what I realize is for the most part, no, but there are things I'm going to take back to my regular tree trunk process and then possibly integrate or explore in different ways.
Even if it's something slight, it pushed and expanded the mind slightly different. But again, it also said, I had that creative urge to try that thing and I know I don't want to do it now.
I just like it in their person's work.
That's fun. I tried it.
I like what they did, but I'm not going to do it.
Well, the other thing is you don't know if it's going to come back. Like you did it now and in like 3 years you could be like, it sat in the back of my head and you just never know. So,
but again, you got to be open.
Yeah.
Like that's where the whole like it's living life in a more open way, which can be more vulnerable, but it also can be like overwhelming, and that's it's a management of information, and so it's almost like self-prescribed ADD in a way where you're trying to be like open. Yeah, you're trying to be like open, but if you kind of like stick on everything, you need to like needs a little bit of a funnel.
Yeah.
I don't know. If somebody has a better recipe, I'd love to hear.
No, I think it's a great way to even wrap it up. So I appreciate you taking the time and sharing so much. Of course, we could talk forever.
Yeah.
Sounds like we may have a still life thing in the pipeline of.
I think we should do it.
Mailing the thing out.
Mailing like a box of the same objects, and then
having a show somewhere.
Yeah.
Just like
of all the same objects, different painters, same stuff. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah.
All right, let's get that in the works.
Well, thanks for having me in your studio.
Well, obviously, always a pleasure because I feel like we're not even two sides of the same coin. I think we're on the same side of the coin.
Of course. Yeah.
No, it's always a pleasure. I mean, I also really love all the work you do in terms of like creating learning tools and creating resources for people, because nobody should be learning from just one person, and I think it's really valuable as we're all putting out information is we just try to make it clear, make it logical, and make it digestible, and I think you do that in a really great way.
Thank you.